I'm waiting on the sun to rise, waiting on the moon's dim glow, looking so deep in your eyes, wishing that time would slow.
Hello, 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 everybody, and welcome to this week of Black Scientists Podcast. And this week, we're going to dive into health disparities. I know we hear that term a lot, but this week we wanted to make sure that we define it and really deep dive into having a good conversation about it. And here to help us with this conversation is our subject matter expert, Dr. Derek Williams. And Williams sounds so familiar for a last name, maybe because that's my big bro. So yeah, my big brother coming to join us to talk about health disparities. Dr. Derek Williams, AKA Professor D, what a lot of his students call him, is an activist academic communication specialist. And he's here to, kind of set the tone and get us started on talking about this very important topic. So right now, I want to take this opportunity, Professor D, big bro, to kind of give us a little bit about who you are.
Oh, thank you, sis. And before I start, I just want to say how proud I am of you sisters. I call y'all sister doctors, and you all are just doing great work. I remember driving up to Nashville one day to see you, sis, and I opened up the apartment and you have all of these wonderful out, and I'm just very, very, very proud of you sisters. And this is a important work that you all are doing, and this is needed work in our community. So I'm just delighted to be here today.
And
Thank
we are
you so
delighted
much.
to have you.
So, Professor D, give us a little background of who you are and what expertise you're bringing to the table today.
Okay. Well, I like to consider myself, I call myself the blue collar scholar. I grew up in a small coal mining town about 12 miles outside of Birmingham. I was born in Birmingham, and it was called Graysville. And there it was a small, sleepy town, but it was a great community, a community of Black people who put their arms around me and actually raised me to be the man that I am today. I started off school. I went to the Iowa Lakes Community College, and then I transferred to Northern Iowa to work on my master's degree. Now, when I was at Northern Iowa, I had a revelation. My mentor, Dr. Karen Mitchell, her partner was Dr. Harry Broad. And Dr. Harry Broad is one of the leading scholars on masculinity studies globally. And we struck up a friendship, and he mentored me. He was a Jewish man, and the masculinity studies movement really started out of the women's lib movement. And then in 1975, they started a masculinity studies, and Dr. Bro was very influential. So he shaped me to look at gender, to look at critical race and those different types of things. And then I would go on to Southern Illinois to finish my doctorate, and all of my degrees are in communication studies. My doctorate focused on critical race, masculinity studies, and community organizing.
Very good. Very good. So that leads us to our first opening question. So our first question, Marla, do you want to kick us off?
I'll take it away from here, but just want to reiterate how much of a privilege and honor it is to have you on, Derek, and just like to reinforce that there is so much talent in the Black community, right, y'all? I mean, there's just so much here, and we have the ability to help ourselves and help each other. So with that, the first question I'd like for you to answer, Derek, is can you tell us about like what are health disparities? Tell us about health disparities, what they are, and really the origins. Where did it come from?
Okay, if you could see my shirt here, I wore my shirt. I mean, it's Black History Month, but I wore my shirt as a homage to one of my sheroes by the name of Fannie Lou Hamer. And Fannie Lou Hamer had a great quote. She used to say, "I'm sick and tired of being sick and tired." Now, those words are synonymous with disparities because when we look at words, they're very, very important. Being a communication scholar, Words shape us. Words shape our laws, our constitution. So the word disparity is very essential because it really means great difference, or it really means inequality. So that word, when we look at the history of that word, it really started to take popularity around the millennial, around 2000, and those different types of things. And that word is a great word to describe what is going on when we look at health between the different ethnicities and race, in particular, Black and white. And the reason why we focus on Black and white, because that is the greatest disparity when we look at health and health outcomes. So it's really important to use wording, and that wording, it can be a way for us to map this kind of historical legacy of these inequalities that happen dating back to enslavement.
Mm. And so dating back to slavery, can you kind of give us some insights on like the psychology? Because it's this is a really interesting conversation, because when you talk about health inequities, I feel like sometimes the media points the finger at the Black community, like, there are all these resources here, but we won't use them. For example, I was having a conversation with a colleague just this week, and she was telling me how some friends of hers were going to Roseland, the Roseland neighborhood in Chicago. And for those of you all that don't know out there, the Roseland neighborhood is a predominantly Black neighborhood in Chicago. So think like Compton, California, or like, Harlem, right? And so these people from this wealthy suburb are coming to Roseland to get their vaccine, because this is one of the only hospitals left in the city that have vaccine, because the community is not coming to get those vaccines, right? And so the question is why? Like, what's the origin of the mistrust, or is it mistrust, or what are the variables that are playing into creating these health disparities or inequities?
That's a great question, and we have to go back to history. But I want to also put into context, when we talk about language and we talk about mapping and looking at these disparities, we can go to Chicago, we can go to Memphis, we can go to any major city that it has a large flux of Black people, and you see these health disparities. Now, Cleveland has the same situation. Cleveland has a world global ranked hospital. Cleveland Clinic is ranked #2 in the nation, and it is surrounded by a sea of poverty from Fairfax, all of those communities. And one of the things too is Cleveland is the poorest city in America. So we see that, and we see those things. But in order for us to understand how we got here, because we can look at a map at Chicago, we can look at all of these cities, Memphis, Birmingham, and we can see these things. But when we look at it from a historical perspective and we think about disparities, where did that come from? We have to go back to the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendment. Now, one of the things that's really important is this word called Reconstruction. When we hear the word Reconstruction, people are like, oh, okay, that was back during that time. But as you said, Mila, the Reconstruction was never resolved, which brings us into all of these types of disparities that we have today. So to answer your question, when we think about the 13th Amendment, that granted African-American, Black people freedom, but it was freedom to do what? And there's a great book by a professor called Jim Downs called Sick from Freedom. So these people were actually released with no land, no resources, and they were just left to their own kind of agency. And it caused that type of disparity that we see here today. The 14th Amendment was a civil rights amendment that was on books, but it took another 100 years. Fannie Lou Hamer, they were fighting for the laws that were established back during 1860. So as we go up to today, the Great Migration, we saw Black people after the 13th, 14th, 15th Amendment to the right to vote. we see that great migration taking place in the early 1900s. A lot of those residents, Black people, 90% of them lived in the South, migrated up to Chicago, Cleveland, Detroit. They were actually placed in what they call redlining districts. And what you're describing, Myla, is this dual, we call it a dual economy, where you have primarily white, wealthy, lives on the outskirts of the city. They come into the city, they work in the city, they leave out. But the residents in the central city have been redlined. So during that Great Depression, Great Migration, when they were looking for jobs and those things, they could not move and gain access to the different types of things. So when we look at health disparities, we have to look at it from a lot of folds. It's a digital divide. A lot of people that live in these areas do not have access to, we like to say, well, they should just get the information. Here in Cleveland, 50% of the people living in those districts right around Cleveland Clinic does not have access to internet service. So it's a long history that has played out that gets us here to today. Now, the mistrust, there's great mistrust when we look at things like the Tuskegee Experiment, where the government could have helped these men who were suffering from syphilis, but they went untreated in those type of things. So that mistrust, along with not having access to the information or readily information, those are some of the things that kind of gets to those disparities.
Hmm.
And you know what, Derek, just listening to you talk about the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendment, those amendments gave us rights, but not access. We're still working on the access.
Yeah.
So it gave us the right to not be enslaved. It gave us the right to citizenship. It gave Black men, not even women, the right to vote. But accessing that vote, accessing that full citizenship. And even when you think about that, the fact that we had to write into the Constitution to make Black people citizens lets us know that that Constitution was not written for us in the first place. So when we're thinking about how those setups now set us up today, and you're talking about mapping disparities, how do you map them? How do you map the disparities that began hundreds of years ago, and still see those remnants by mapping? And what types of characteristics do you map according to? Is it race? Is it gender? Is it class? What kind of things do you use to determine those maps?
Okay, one of the ways is, you talked about race and those things, is the importance of lineage, because lineage is important. Like race is important, but lineage is more important. And my case in point is, if we are saying people of color, we have brown people here in America that's East Asian. They do very well income-wise and those things. But when we point a finger at lineage, that's when we can tie it back to those historical, the historical legacy of the 13th, 14th, and 15th. Now, here's another thing to think about, Lee. You brought up a great point. So once those laws were enacted, I'm here in Ohio, and Ohio was a great state for abolition and those things, but they had a president by the name of Rutherford B. Hayes. He made a deal with the South to win the election. He removed federal troops, and Reconstruction started right after the Civil War, 1865 to 1877. So it was a 12-year period where those laws were passed. Now, here's what was really that we could map it towards. After the troops were withdrawn, we got a chance to see Jane Crow segregation come in, but it was actually even worse, as what Dr. Downs said. When you were enslaved, there was an incentive for the person who owned you at that time. It was an incentive for them to try to keep you healthy to a certain point for work production. What happens when that is no longer the case and these individuals were basically left out to their own devices? So Lee, it is just amazing that we are alive from that period. So from that 1877 to the 1900s, that was one of what they call the most dangerous times to be Black in America when we trace that lineage. And then we see the start of convict leasing. That was another form of what they call slavery by another name. And when we talk about this, Shantae and I, our grandfather was a coal miner and he suffered from diabetes. And it was a conversation that my aunt told me that she overheard my granddad and grandmother having one day. And he was a coal miner in the 1940s. He did what was called a micro migration from the Black Belt to go to Birmingham. He didn't leave the state. And she said he was really sick that day, and the diabetes was like really bothering him that day. And my grandmother said, Nathan, you need to stay home today. And my granddad said, Bert, my grandmother Bertha said, Bert, we have these 10 kids. I gotta go. So he went in that coal mine and sick. So we began to see this trajectory of not having health, any type of health care, and then being exploited through convict leasing and all of those things that brought us to the Great Migration, when they make their way up north, and then they find themselves in similar situations, being put in poor, dilapidated housing, and the like. So it's definitely traced towards lineage. I always tell people, Lee, that my granddad, I like to call this thing, I call it like a sojourn, that I sojourn from I can trace the lineage from his granddad. My granddad's father was Nathan Williams. He was a sharecropper. He didn't get any land, which forced my granddad to move to Birmingham. And that was a large labor class of just workers that you could exploit. Then moving up north. So this lineage and the connection, we have to make all of these connections that my grandmother used to say, health is wealth. And it's definitely tied towards that.
So bro, can you I'm sorry, can you take us just a step back when you said, let's go back to when you pointed out about lineage. Can you define what that term means when you're saying it all boils down to your lineage?
Right.
What do you mean by that?
Yes. So race is just a phenotype. That is just basically a social construct, right? Someone woke up one day and said, this is a Black person, this is a white person. That's a social construct. Now that has material consequences in the world. We know with the killing of unarmed Black people, we understand that that is an issue. But when we get specific and we look at lineage connects you to a lived historical experience. So when I tell people that I am a Black American of enslaved people, that links me back to the lineage, that links me back to Fannie Lou Hamer, whose father was a sharecropper, and it links me to grandma, all of those different types of things. Now, the lineage is important because the lineage gets us to the wealth thing. When we look at people who migrate to America, and they are people of color, those are usually individuals who have they have a certain type of wealth position to even be able to come over here. Now the important thing is to note, sis, this is really important while we have to link lineage and understand how Cleveland Clinic can be this world global hospital and have so many people impoverished, is that we got to look at Reconstruction again. On the eve of the Civil War, Black people in the country own 0.5% of the nation's wealth. Today, we own almost about 2% of the nation's wealth. So that hasn't moved one iota pretty much. It's still the same. So when we say that lineage, we're able to connect our current conditions. We've been in this country for over 400 years. We built it. People who were enslaved, they were worth more than the railroads. People leveraged them and those kind of things. So we have to link that back to the actual where it started. And the thing is a lot of people say, well, that's a long time ago. That's a long time ago. I don't have anything to do with that. I like to call these things, as Lee said, Reconstruction number one. That was the amendments, the laws that they pushed for. Reconstruction two, Fannie Lou Hamer, Dr. Martin Luther King, Ella Baker, Malcolm X pushing America to live to those values. Dr. King said, be true to what you said on paper. And now we're in what people call the third Reconstruction. We're evaluating, we are looking at those different types of outcomes. And the outcomes is what we're talking about today. There is a great disparity, and it did not happen by accident.
I just have to, we just need to dwell on this lineage piece just for
Isn't
one
it good?
moment. It's so good and it's so critical, because like what our viewers have to take from this is that Derek traced his lineage all the way back to sharecropping, right? And then prior to sharecropping, slavery. And you know what he's saying is that those mentalities, you know, those traumas that were experienced, you know, being told and that you were chattel property, right? And having to have been taken care of by an owner with regards to healthcare, because you were property and they had to make sure that you were able to work. But then if you weren't able to work, if you got older or sick, then they sold you, you know, perhaps to a doctor, and then there's medical experimentation. So there are all these traumas that were experienced by our ancestors, right? That goes all the way back into our lineages. And you don't just drop those. You don't just wake up, you know, and all of that goes away. So the slave passed on trauma to the sharecropper. The sharecropper passed on trauma and experiences to the coal miner. The coal miner grandfather passed off those experiences and traumas, you know, to the next generation and the next generation. And the reality is there are a lot of Black folks that feel like they just don't deserve health care. They're not worthy of health care. They don't deserve the access because we have been taught to go, 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 work, 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 push through, and not self-maintain, because we've always been taught since we arrived here on American soil that we were not human.
Yeah.
Right. So I just had to take that moment, you know, because that was powerful, Derek. It was very, very powerful. And I want to make sure our viewers really get the importance of lineage and the impact.
And it's also important, Mila, that it goes because I think even when we bring it back to the vaccine and whether or not you should take it, or, you know, getting, you know, healthcare treatment, you know, overall, I think we have to look at that it goes beyond the Tuskegee experiment. I think, bro, what you just did was explain that through this, like, you don't really understand why you feel this way about going to the doctor, or even admitting that you don't feel well. Like, some Black Americans just have a problem even admitting that it's okay to wake up and just don't feel good. But we are, we have in our minds that we have to go, go, go. And I think, bro, what you just explained just kind of put some light to why we feel and we act that way. And it's beyond the Tuskegee experiment. It goes way, way before that.
Absolutely,
I just
absolutely.
want to add to the idea of this timeline, because when we say 400 years, that sounds like a long time ago, but that really is only like 4 to 5 generations ago when you think about it that way. So when you think about 4 to 5 generations, that's just like your great great grandparents. That's not that far away. So we're really not that far removed from enslavement itself generationally.
No.
Think when Derek talks about that lineage, and then the points that Mila and Shantae made about why that the traumas are still kind of fresh when you
Yeah.
think about it, generationally versus thinking about it in terms of in terms of hundreds of years. That makes it sound like it was a long time ago, but it really wasn't. And when you think about and when you know exactly what those people experience, when you dig down deep into what they really experience, like Derek said, it is amazing that we are here today. We're alive today because our ancestors fought through, struggled, and had the resilience and resistance to be able to survive that trauma. Now, yeah, pass it on to us, but we're here, right? We're here. And so, but now I think it's time that we got to learn how to deal with these traumas, recognize and deal with these traumas, and understand that they're real. And I think a lot of times our feelings get invalidated and not deemed as being truthful. People, physicians think that Black women can withstand, abnormal amounts of pain, so they don't take us seriously when we say we're in pain. It's all kinds of things that are just rooted in that. And those things really didn't happen that long ago. And I just
Yeah.
want to talk about that time.
So in discussing this lineage and traumas and these passed on or inherited traumas that we carry with us, how do we begin to bridge that gap, close those disparities? What does that possibly look like for us?
Okay, that's a great question. I want to bring another term in that'll allow us to kind of map and also connect the historical with the current. There's new literature and scholars that's looking at how systemic racism and the impact that it has on Black people, and they call it social weathering. And they're saying it's like a weathering effect. It just slowly like just disintegrates you to a point where you feel you can't. What Mila said something very, very important. How many of us or Black people feel worthy that, hey, I deserve this? And I'm gonna go back to Fannie Lou Hamer, you all. Fannie Lou Hamer, bless her heart, she died. She had high blood pressure. She died of breast cancer. And I want us all to kind of look at her last interviews and look at how sick she looked. And she was still going on the campaign, advocating for those things. So Mila, I think the first thing, as what Mila says, that all communication starts intrapersonally. You have to first feel like, hey, I have a right to, and I have a right to have health care and those different types of things. How many of us, you all, and this really is going to be a lot that we need to do. But think about this as what Mila said, because I'm just putting myself out there. It's times where I have health care and I fall into that same pattern. Oh, I'm okay, I'm gonna go later, and those kind of things. And where we have to break that. And that's going to be something that's difficult to break because of that lineage and that history. And you all know why I felt that way is that Shantae and our father, I don't remember him saying, I need to go to the doctor to get checked out and those kind of things. And he had A1 healthcare as an iron worker and those types of things. So number one, it starts with us having the sense and knowing what health, knowing what we should speak out for. And then the other one again is trying to go back and understand, how did I get here? Because a lot of times we don't know how did we get here. In America, you all, we're still living under the American myth. And that, I want to just say that because it's going to take a lot of education, but we're still living under what the daughters of the Confederates did. After the Civil War in the early 1900s, they basically waged a campaign which was called the Lost Cause, and we're still living under those kind of pretenses. This thing about meritocracy, there's no such thing as a poverty. You just have a poor mindset. So we're trying to unlearn all of those different things. But I think it gets to what Mila was saying. We just have to feel like I'm worthy to go in and to get health care, and I demand the same rights to health as anybody else. And I just think that's a lot of work to do. Education is important to you all, because like I said, that myth that the Daughters of the Confederacy, people still believe those things about Black people and those things. They were put in our textbooks and the likes. So it's going to be a lot of like Carter G. Woodson said, it's a lot of miseducation. Because speaking of the vaccine, I've had friends, I've had like relatives, and the first thing they bring up is the Tuskegee Experiment. And I'll always say, I said, okay, tell me about the Tuskegee Experiment. Well, you know, that's when they got, I don't trust them vaccines. That's when they got the vaccines and they pumped us full of stuff. And I said, did you read the study? Did you read the study? And it goes back to what Mila was saying. And it connects us back to that your question about enslavement. We have advanced medical technology by being from medicine being withheld from us, not given to us, but withheld from us. The Tuskegee Experiment was based again upon not receiving vaccination during that time. So it's a lot of just re-educating, educating, and being a communication person. What I found is that I let people speak their truth. I let them speak their truth and try to find a place to try to connect with them, to try to give them the accurate information. Like I don't go in when someone says they have it inaccurate. That's a teaching moment for me to kind of talk to them and discuss and kind of walk them through the vaccination. And another thing too, when I was talking back to the social weathering, like having a conversation with our relatives. I can just speak for Shantae and I. Our family has a history of heart disease, diabetes, hypertension, which I suffer from. And it's important to let Black people, African American people know that, hey, the COVID is much more deadlier for us because we have all of these pre-existing things. So I've had like loving conversations with family members and friends that would, you know, they'll listen. So we got to just continue and do the great work that you sisters are doing, putting this information out. I think that's like the number one thing to bridging that gap.
That, and you know, let's do this for our community. On behalf of the scientific community, y'all, we acknowledge that modern medicine was built on the backs of Black folks. Mm-hmm. Okay, there would be no modern medicine had it not been for Black people. Okay, so let's just get that out the way. There were some ills that happened in the past with regards to medical experimentation with Black folks. Let's get that out the way as well. But now, today is a new day. There are Black scientists, there are Black clinicians, physicians, okay? So let's not let that be a barrier to being able to now take care of ourselves and leverage the advantages and the advances of medicine today so that we can live and we can change things. It's so important.
Absolutely.
That's good. That's good. That's good. Man, this has been such a great conversation. And I think we can go on and on and on. We definitely have to bring you back, Dr. D, yes, because you have put some light on us. I want to end the segment with just one more question. Bro, this is a two-part question. The first part is, what gives you meaning? And what inspired what inspired you to dedicate your time to share your expertise with us today?
Okay. Thank you for sharing that, sis. And thank you, sister doctors, all of you, for inviting me. You all are just wonderful. You all are my little sisters, and I love you, each of you dearly. What inspires me, sis, is that I know the shoulders. I know the shoulders that I stand upon, and I wake up every day and I think about those unsung heroes. I have Fannie Lou Hamer, who was an unsung hero, but she's now getting a lot of attention. But I just think, sis, of the people who got us here, all of those people in those fields on those what they call sun up to sundown, picking that cotton, and they never got a chance to experience freedom. They never got a chance to have their voice heard. So I think it would just be selfish of me to just wake up every day and just think about myself. And I'm only standing here because those people got us here in spite of everything we've talked about today. We talked about, and so many things we did not talk about. So sis, I stand on the shoulders of my elders who have fought. Now, here's another thing too, sis. I think I get a little, and you got this too in you too, sis. You got this in your blood too. I think, sis, growing up in Birmingham, Alabama, and walking the streets of all of those children, all of those legends that we got a chance to see, and we had a mother that would drive us downtown to see Kelly Ingram Park and to see what Black people had gone through. And I think, sis, that just stuck with us and it has never left us. And that's why we do the work that we do today. But again, sis, I stand on the shoulders of people who got me here. And I need to do the work and let people stand on my shoulders after I'm gone. They pick up the work. Because I may not see any of the results that I've done here on this earth, but those people did not as well. And they got us here.
That's good.
That's it.
That's good. That's good. Well, thank you, Dr. D. Thank you, Professor D. We enjoyed the conversation, and we definitely stand on the shoulders of those that came before us. And that's why Black Science Cooperative is here. We're here to educate and to do what we can so that we can empower with knowledge. So thank everybody for joining. Thank everybody for tuning in, and we will see you on our next episode. Until then, peace, everybody.
Deuces.
Deep flows like a breeze flowing through me, from my head to my feet. Your love runs smooth, ooh, it soothes, and you're making life bright. I'm so glad that you're mine, yeah, 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 yeah.